What is up, everyone? Welcome to HiFi Turtle, where we talk about everything audio. Today we're kicking off 2023 with our first review, and a very special one at that. It is the Gold Note DS-10 Plus DAC. This is a very attractive looking device made in Italy in your choice of color between black, silver, and gold. In this instance, of course, we have the black finish. It is an all brushed aluminum chassis that looks absolutely stunning. It is very meticulously crafted. There are intricate designs in the chassis and it feels very substantial in the hand. I definitely thought that this felt like a premium product and definitely looked the part as well. Before we get too far into the review, I want to address two very quick things that I think people will probably bring up. One is this is the DS-10 Plus version of this DAC. There is a regular DS-10 as well now as a DS-10 Evo. The DS-10 Plus is priced at $3,700 US. The DS-10 regular is priced at $3,000 US. The DS-10 Evo is priced as the same as the Plus at $3,700 US. There is also an external power supply that can be yours for $1,400 US. The external power supply works with any of the three DACs that I have just mentioned. So what are the differences between the three versions of the DAC? And especially, more curiously, why is the Plus and the Evo the same exact price? Is there a feature that is missing on the Plus that is available on the Evo and vice versa? Well, unfortunately, it's not that clear-cut. While it is more clear-cut what the differences are between the Plus and the Evo compared to the regular DS-10, where the regular DS-10 does not have Bluetooth 5.0 functionality, it has a reduced wireless capability, and does not have a line-in input or over-the-air firmware update capabilities. However, the differences between the Plus and the Evo are less clear-cut, and I think it's harder to determine what the differences really are. And unfortunately, I only had the Plus version of this unit. I did not have the Evo version of this unit, so putting them side by side or understanding what those differences are from a first-hand perspective, I unfortunately will not be able to offer in this video. However, from my understanding, the Evo version does have an improved power supply over the Plus. And the Evo also operates on a more advanced firmware version than the Plus. While the Plus is on a 1. Whatever version of the firmware, the Evo is on a 2. Whatever version of the firmware today. I didn't memorize the numbers, forgive me, but I know the Plus and the DS-10 are using the exact same firmware, whereas the Evo is on a more advanced firmware and the interface looks a little bit different from the pictures I've seen online of both. But if that is the case, then why are the Evo and the Plus priced exactly the same? It seems to me that the Evo would be a clear winner or improvement over the Plus version, if it's true that it has an improved power stage and more advanced firmware than the Plus version. And again, this is an answer that I can't really answer. This is something that Gold Note is going to have to clarify, because I am kind of baffled why the Plus and the Evo are priced the same. The second thing I want to address is I'm sure you're all going to be very curious about the sound compared to the stock DAC versus the DAC with the power supply. Well, unfortunately, I received the incorrect power supply to power this DAC. I received a PSU-10, which is used for the PH5 and PH10 phono preamps, where the DS-10 and its variants require a PSU-10 Evo. You can see how easy that would be to confuse and mix up. So I wish that Gold Note had a better distinction between the differences between their power supplies and the products that they use with them, or it was just an entirely different unit for each individual, or that you could use the same power supply for both units. So now that I've gotten past the semantics, logistics challenges, and naming and numbering scheme that is somewhat confusing from Gold Note's side, let's talk about the unit itself. So on board, we do have the AKM4493 DAC chip. This is a pretty rare chip to find these days, ever since AKM had its fire, but I guess Gold Note either has an extreme supply of these or was able to secure some very early orders when AKM reopened their facilities. In addition to being a DAC, there is a preamplifier stage, there is a headphone amp, and there is the ability to stream, and you get the Gold Note controller app, which is free on iPhone and Android. We'll talk more about the app and its functions and features a little later. The DS-10 is a one knob control. The knob on the front of the DS-10 controls the on-off, as well as all the selectable features of the DAC. You can put it into preamp mode, into line out, or headphone mode. You cannot do both at the same time. Also selectable are sound profiles. There are 3 separate sound profiles you can set up, as well as the default off for any flavoring added by these sound profiles. Going into the setup, you'll see 3 different bars from which you can select. The first bar is a ultrasonic frequency filter that is available as the defaults from the AKM4493 chip. There are different selectable options here for how fast or how slow or how tuned you want the roll-off to be after 20 kilohertz. The second bar has 3 levels of a high frequency de-emphasizer. So this is a little bit of an EQ where you can take down the treble response in 3 different steps, each one being more aggressive than the last. And then the last is a power profile, which has many different steps, and I don't think it was very well explained what exactly this does. I'm guessing it does something slightly with the power supply that's on board, but to be honest with you, right off the gate, I really could not hear much of a difference when just playing around with this setting. And while it's nice to have all these options, for the majority, and by majority I mean like 99.9% of my listening, I listened to these profiles just being off and not having any sort of flavoring or difference added from just the stock sound of the DAC. That is in part because I wanted to evaluate the stock sound, as well as I thought the stock sound sounded the best from playing with all the filters. Going to the Gold Note controller app, basically you have the exact same setup, but to set this app up requires some tinkering. When I got my unit, it already had a Wi-Fi profile that was associated with it. It was not my Wi-Fi profile. So I had to hold the button in the back of the unit in order to reset the Wi-Fi settings. That wasn't ever really explained in any of the documentation that I found from Gold Note online, and I just said, well, it's not working, this thing says reset, I'm gonna hit the button. And lo and behold, it did work. But that's not as simple as it sounds, because the next step when you actually set up your Wi-Fi connection from the app is not to find the device in the app. It's to connect your phone or iPad or whatever to the Gold Note, entering the default password, which is password, then going back to the app, finding the unit, then finding your home Wi-Fi, putting in the home Wi-Fi settings in the Gold Note app, going out, restarting the device, going back in, selecting the device that now has your home Wi-Fi established, and then now you can finally use the selected device as intended. Does that sound confusing? It definitely was, and definitely seemed like a lot of steps to get where I wanted to be. That being said, I can't say I expect a lot from hi-fi companies when it comes to technology, and just being able to even use this thing wirelessly with a remote control, yeah, I guess that's pretty advanced for a lot of these companies. Now going into the controls, we basically have all the selectable options that we had from the one knob function of the DS-10. But there are some quirks to this. And when I say quirks, most notably, when trying to change between preamplifier and DAC, there is a warning notice that comes on the screen that says, hey, you're about to change this setting from preamplifier to DAC. That means it's going to be full blast volume. Do not turn this on unless you have an external preamp and it is at a reasonable volume so you don't blow your speakers or blow your ears. Well, that warning cannot be disregarded or accepted from the app. It has to be done on the unit itself. So if you change modes unexpectedly or intentionally, you will have to get up to the unit and accept that disclaimer / warning. Well, it's kind of goofy. And there were certain times when using the app, there were disconnects between the unit and the app settings where it would start to tear, or it would display something on the screen that would kind of go through certain things, like the warning wouldn't disappear, and then the volume would show up, and then there'd be kind of parts of the warning and then parts of the volume also displaying on the screen. So there are definitely some bugs, but just using it purely as a DAC and not trying to fiddle with all the different settings, I never experienced a problem. So not so much a bug or a problem that would cause you to not be able to use the device, but just some odd little quirks in using the device, and especially when using the device with the Gold Note controller, which to my understanding is probably not actually developed by Gold Note. It's probably a third-party application developer. All right, so let's get to the meat and potatoes, the DAC. This thing sounds amazing. It sounds amazing, and I really don't say that lightly. I think that it is one of the best DACs that I have heard in this room, and that is without any price consideration in mind. I think it is very smooth, I think it is very musical, and I want to say that this is the first time on this channel I have ever described something as musical. I might be wrong, but that's the first word that really struck me when I was listening to the DS-10 Plus. Musical. And I can't say I've ever enjoyed listening at a lower volume than I did on the DS-10 Plus. And not to say that it can't play at a higher volume, because it definitely can. But I found myself being able to enjoy more music at a lower volume, which is good for my ears overall, and I think a testament to the overall sound quality of this device, that you don't have to turn it up loud in order to get high quality. You can still get all the nuance, all the details of the music, even at a lower volume. But while I say musical, I don't mean underly analytical or lacking detail or any sort of negative connotation that could come with that word, but rather just an absolute ability to enjoy music to the fullest while still maintaining a lot of details and having absolute fidelity throughout the entire range of music that I listen to on this thing. And I listen to quite a bit of different music. Of course, I had some of my favorites coming out of 2022. I had my Callous Cowboys, Unto Others, Chemists, but even some artists that I thought were very harsh and hard to listen to, honestly, on some other DACs, like Zornheim or The Faceless. Very much so more enjoyable and able to listen to the entire album on this DAC. It took a little bit of the edge off. Not in a way that was less detailed or, oh, I thought that just the treble was rolled off. No, it was definitely more nuanced, more just musical than analytical, and therefore more enjoyable, at least with my system. I felt very neutral positioning. I felt like there was a great 3D-ness to the soundstage as far as depth went, but a little bit less in the ways of width. So kind of an interesting dynamic there, where I felt like the soundstage from what I'm used to with Benchmark DAC 3 is much deeper, but not as wide as the DAC 3. So take that as whatever you might. But again, using the DS-10 Plus as purely a DAC was absolutely phenomenal. And I think for the asking price of $3,700 for the Plus or Evo, or even $3,000 for the regular DS-10 is 100% well worth it. Now, I've only talked about using the DS-10 as a DAC. Like I said before, this is a preamplifier as well as a headphone amplifier, but I will say I don't feel like the selling points of this is the preamplifier section or the headphone amplifier section like it was on the Boulder 812. I very much so believe this device is best used as a DAC. And while the preamplifier and headphone amp sections definitely have their redeeming qualities and appealing qualities, I think that I got better performance with external separate components in my Benchmark LA4, as well as using the Sim Audio 230 HAD purely as a headphone amplifier and preamplifier, and not with the onboard DAC section for that headphone amp. I will say the most appealing quality of the preamplifier and headphone amp section was the airiness and openness of the sound. It was very wide of a soundstage and definitely had a lot of air and breadth and depth to the presentation of the music. I will say that I felt like sometimes that could leave vocals a little hollow sounding, as well as some other parts of the music being or sounding a little de-emphasized. It seemed like the music was being played in a large empty amphitheater rather than, a clean-cut stereo recording. But if that large empty amphitheater with a lot of air and depth sounds very appealing to you, it wasn't my taste, but for you, it might be. All right, so concluding thoughts on the Gold Note DS-10 DAC. What did I think? I thought it was amazing, especially as a DAC. Amazing. Well worth the asking price. So much so, I am putting an order in for one. I haven't decided if I'm going to go, which version of the DS-10 I'm going to order, but I am for sure, 100% guaranteed, going to put in an order for a Gold Note DS-10. You heard it here first. Now, if the DAC portion is not that important to you, or you want this all-encompassing, just add amplification box, then I still think the Gold Note is a solid choice, but I think that the part of the DAC is greater than the sum of its parts. I don't know the right expression to say there, but I think the DAC, if you intend to use it as a DAC, absolutely 100% worth it. If you're looking for a DAC, preamplifier, headphone amp, streamer, well, then it becomes more complicated because which one are you putting all the weight into? Because if you're putting a lot of weight into the streaming section, but you have Amazon Music, well, that's not going to work for you. And I will say that probably my biggest complaint with using the DS-10 is the technology side of it. The app was finicky, the interface is a little finicky, so using it as your dedicated streaming device, I don't know. I'm sure that there are going to be improvements made, and I know there's new firmware out there, especially as I said before, the Evo version has a different interface and newer firmware than the Plus and regular DS-10 variants, which I'm hoping that the Plus and regular DS-10 will eventually get that firmware update or continue to get firmware updates from here on. The preamplifier and headphone section weren't exactly to my taste, but definitely were still good. But would I say that for $3,000 or for $3,700, there aren't better options for strictly those two features? I can't say that. But for the DAC section, if your primary intention is to use this device as a DAC, if you're looking for a DAC, I can't think of anything else I could recommend more. I think it sounds so amazing. And again, I'm going to buy one because I intend to use this thing as a DAC. I think it's so much well worth the money to plunk down for this. So will I get the external power supply? I don't know. Maybe I'll get to try it later on. There'll be a follow-up review or follow-up just like kind of mini thing that I do to talk about that. We'll see. But I think even without the power supply, it still wowed me enough to want this thing in my own personal system to have. That's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it that thumbs up if you did. Make sure you subscribe. It really helps me out. Check the links below in the description for other ways to help support the channel. Thank you to Quintessence Audio for supplying the DS-10 Plus. And as always, I will see you in the next one.